thoroughbreds. You can't, you're just betting against the pool in the pool and at the racetrack. You can only win or lose so much at a time. And it took me till I was 45 to blow through 25 years worth of earnings. If I had an app on my phone at that time, I can't tell you how dangerous that is.
Rex, where does this podcast find you?
I'm in Minneapolis.
Minneapolis for the playoffs.
For the playoffs, yep.
That is nice. So let's bust right into it. We loved your memoir. It's hard for me to live with me. Can you tell us more about what led you to writing this and what you learned about yourself throughout the process?
Oof. You've written books. I'm not a writer. Seth Davis, terrific writer, helped me with this. He called me a few years ago, actually 4 years ago, and I think he had seen me on a news spot with our friend Stephanie Rule. And, I was just coming out of, getting out of rehab for painkillers and had kind of gone off the rails a bit. And Seth felt like, maybe some of the things that I could tell and share might help some other people. And, we started in on it, and it was a horrible process. I hated it, Scott. There would be times where we would talk every day, and then I just couldn't talk about this stuff for, a week or two. I'd have to take a break. So Seth hung in there with me, and, it was kind of hard to talk about. But I think I'm getting to the point where it's a bit cathartic. It's been a process, but yeah, definitely a painful kind of experience.
So just for some context, I think most people know you, but for those of our listeners that don't, Rex has struggled with addiction and obviously had a big impact in Kentucky basketball and the NBA. But I think you're sort of having a bigger impact now. And I thought of you, seriously, Rex. I went on this podcast, a guy named Rich Roll. Do you know Rich?
Yes, I know of him.
And he was so moved by the community of recovery that he kind of, I wouldn't say shaped his life around it, but it's really sort of informed his life view. And I think that you're one of those people that is being very raw about it and helps people, or people can look at you and they can empathize. Tell us about, and I apologize, I'm going to go to a pretty dark place here, but one of the things he said was, so many people tried to intervene, and it wasn't until I was ready that any of them could have any impact or help me. Did you have a similar experience? And if so, what was that moment and what catalyzed sort of where you could register or recognize that you were ready to get help?
Scott, since I was little, I was a horse racing fan and gambler. And my whole life I did that from the time I would go to the track with my father when I was 5 or 6 years old. And so I could read a racing form probably before I could read in school. And so I had some issues, but then I had the painkiller issue, and I had friends and family members telling me about the painkillers, that, I was ruining my life, that the gambling was ruining my life. And I think I was just so lost and prideful that I had just resigned myself that these pills were going to be part of me for the rest of my life. I couldn't stop. It was 14 years from the time I finished playing until the time I went to rehab for the third time. I was just broken at that point, Scott, and broke. And it's easy not to gamble when you don't have any money. So, I went to rehab, and there was a moment in rehab, the final time in 2014, where it was family day, and my kids came in. And, this is the first time really in 14 years that I've felt anything. All my emotions had been numbed by pain medicine, and they showed up, and I was just a crying mess. But I promised them, I was going to do my best to stay off these drugs, and that I was going to be different. And they all, they ranged anywhere from 10 to 20 at the time. and they were sitting there, and my oldest daughter, who was probably 18, I said, "I'm gonna do my best to stay off these drugs," and she said, "That's great. What about the gambling?" And it was something in rehab we hadn't even really addressed yet, but just had a little bit, and my therapist was in the room at the time, and when my daughter said that, my first instinct was, "Hey, look at what I'm doing here. I'm really trying." And I looked at my therapist, and she nodded at me like, and in that moment, I had to, really admit, "No, man, you have a gambling problem also, and you have to attack that."
It's interesting, Rex. I know you. I don't know you well, and I knew you were addicted to painkillers, but I didn't know about the gambling. And my mom, who was a docent at a casino during her retirement years, the Bellagio, she used to come home and tell me statistics about the hospitality industry and gaming. And the stat she told me that always blew me away is that the addiction with the highest suicide rate is gambling, because when you're addicted to painkillers, your family notices. When you're an alcoholic, people intervene, they notice. They may not be able to help, but you can get in so far over your head and no one knows. Was your addiction to painkillers in a weird way, did that help surface another addiction before it got too out of control?
Phew, man. I think my whole life, I probably just traded one addiction for another going back. Because I didn't drink. I didn't drink and I didn't smoke. I felt like, I think I knew deep down that, I have a lot of that in my family. I felt like if both sides, my father's side gambled, my mother's side, a lot of mental illness, probably both sides was mental illness, but alcohol and drugs and whatnot. So I think I was always just very scared that I would like that. And I I stayed away from it. And I think therefore I kind of justified going to the track. I'm not hurting anybody but myself, I'm going to the track, or I might not go to the track for months, but I'm playing golf every day for 9 hours when I should be spending some of that time at home, you know, uh, chasing girls. I would just trade one, distraction for another to probably to keep me from thinking about all the shit that was going on in my life. And the hardest part for me, Scott, really and truly over the past 8 or 9 years hasn't been staying off the medicine. It's been learning to sit in my bad feelings and not get a pain pill or run to the track and spend 7 hours there in a racing form thinking of nothing else. Um, that has been something. I didn't have any coping skills for anything I was going through my whole life until really I entered rehab for the last time at age 45 or 6.
And this is I don't know, an odd, obtuse question, so I apologize in advance if it comes out unfeeling or incorrectly. I look at you now, you're a big, handsome guy that's probably making really good money covering sports. Your family seems to, and I don't know this, but I'm going to assume they've forgiven you and they just want you to be happy. You look like you're really healthy. I mean, you kind of like, you're the guy that most of us want to be, Rex, right
Come
here and
on.
now. Well, anyways, I don't know what the reality is, but that's perception.
Yeah, thank you.
And when you're sitting there and you're thinking, like, you got to fight back these bad feelings that you kind of naturally have an inclination to medicate with whatever. What are those bad feelings? Is it depression that you did is chemical that you just bad thoughts? Is it guilt over what happened? What are
Both.
those,
It's a
if
bit
you're
of
comfortable
both.
sharing, what are those bad
Yeah.
feelings?
Yeah. So no, that's a great question. Since I was young, Scott, I can imagine worst case scenarios. I always kind of have always felt like the sky is falling, and for no reason. I learned that that's anxiety, and I have dealt with it my whole life. I purposely made myself throw up before every game I played until I was 20, probably 23 years old. Grade school, high school, college, NBA, 82 games a year in the NBA, so I couldn't continue that, but, I did that. It was anxiety. The second I threw up, I felt great. My dad did it. I watched him do it for
Phil
the
Russell
teams he
used to do it,
coached.
didn't he? Didn't a lot of famous
Probably.
players do it? Yeah.
Athletes are weird, but again, that's not super healthy, and, you know, so anxiety, I did, looking back, when late high school, especially college, depression, I was sleeping a lot. Again, I just thought, "Well, I'm getting my rest, I'm not out partying." Well, no, I was sleeping, I was depressed, and something I couldn't talk to people about, or didn't feel like I could talk to people about. So my brain just I felt like it's always running hot, like I just can't sit still. ADD, of course, and, I'm a bit dyslexic, so and stuff that I never knew, stuff that like that kinda soured me on school. I kinda thought, "Well, look, why can everybody in this room read that as fast as one another? I can't read that as fast. I can comprehend it, but I can't read it. Teleprompter, same way." So I dealt with a lot of insecurity and deal with a lot of insecurity. But, yeah, I think that, just I'm a mess in some ways. And when you said, we look at you as the guy, man, Scott, that's how I look at you. That's how I look at the guy standing down on the street corner. I'm like, man, I bet he's got it all together, you know? Uh, and of course, that's not true. Not everybody doesn't have it together. We're all just walking around with these thoughts in our heads, and it's better if we can all get along and listen to one another.
And if there was one or two, we all have people who have not struggled with addiction. We all have our perception, our mythology around what recovery looks like. What was the most surprising things about what worked or what didn't work? Like, if you were to say, these are the two things, surprises to the upside or the downside, that people don't understand about recovery and what it means to come out the other end sober.
Man, I honestly think at this point that being in therapy, and I find myself talking about it. People will ask me a question, and it might not have anything to do with rehab or recovery, but I'll draw on an experience that I had in rehab, a story that somebody will tell me that someone told. And before I know it, I'm in a conversation with somebody else, and they're telling me something about themselves, being vulnerable. And it's weird, but it's pretty cool, because guys like you and I didn't used to dare talk like this. We might, if we were really good friends, talk about it in private, but even then, you wouldn't really, kinda get to the bottom of whatever it is you're dealing with. The therapist part for me has been huge, absolutely huge. You know, I didn't I didn't trust anybody. I didn't trust people well enough to tell complete strangers what was going on with me, and when I look back, man, I was just so silly for doing that, just so prideful, and like you said, some of the stuff is guilt, some of it is shame, for things that I've done, things that I've said, things that I've, thought, but the guilt and shame part of doing this publicly to my kids and my ex-wife and my mom and dad, my family and friends, my friends' children who idolized me, or idolized me. I thought at that point I was so broken, but I remember thinking, I've got to try to, regain some of this in my life, and try to do better, and regain the trust of all these people I've let down.
There's no elegant way to pivot to the future of sports to try and do it. You've kind of seen sports from a lot of different angles, right? Ranging from a high school athlete to an NBA star to someone who's advising NBA teams, commentating on them. I'm curious, when you look at the ecosystem of sports, what do you see in terms of big trends or how things have changed? Or is there anything that people aren't seeing? It's such an enormous industry right now. It has so much speculation and people talking about it so much. But what do you see that's changing about the world of sport?
You know, when we were growing up, it seemed like, the media was pretty fair with the players. You talked about their wins and losses and the streaks that they were on, and he's playing well and he's not playing well, and he's hurt and he's not hurt. It's almost like sports media has become like the worst parts of Twitter or X.
That's
It's
this. You mean the sewage system of the sewage system? It's that
you have
bad.
to yeah, you have to have a hot take about everything, and you can't. There's no way to have a hot take about everything. You have to agree on some things. Some things are obvious when you watch a game. But anymore, you've got one person sitting there, "I'll take this side, you take the other side." And it's ridiculous. And I think it's, athletes are pretty weird anyway. But I think what we're seeing is, you see a lot more athletes that are terrified of the media, that don't want to talk to the media, that want to go on their boys' podcast or their own podcast and get their message out, which, to be honest, if I could have done that way back when, I would have probably done. I just feel like, and with sports, now we have, the gambling, Scott, and I'm not going to sit up here and I was not a sports gambler. I've never bet on a game, a team sport in my life. I was strictly thoroughbreds and blackjack and craps and all that stuff. It's super dangerous. It's
I'm
super
so glad to hear
dangerous.
you say that. It's the you
Yeah,
did you.
and
It's the
here's
fastest
why.
growing industry outside of
Yeah,
AI right now.
here's what I'll tell you. I blew through, between divorce, but mostly gambling, blew through some $40 million in my career. Thoroughbreds. No, you can't. You're just betting against the pool at in the pool and at the racetrack. You can only win or lose so much at a time. And it took me till I was 45 to blow through 25 years worth of earnings. If I would have had an app on my phone, because for years I lived in Kentucky. New York Racing Association had a wagering account, a phone wagering account in the 90s. I got a New York Racing Association account. I would call, I would have to talk to a person. Hey, give me $200 to win on the 6 at Aqueduct. I'd have to do that. It was time consuming. If you ran out of money, you had to send a cashier's check, snail mail, all that stuff. If I had an app on my phone at that time where I make a bet and, oh, I'm out of money and I can just go boop, boop, here you go, put in another $2,500. I can't tell you how dangerous that is. And for addicts, especially gambling addicts, you can't stop. And you'll bet on anything at some point where it's just about the action. And the most confounding thing for me when I look back is what was I doing? Like, I would take 15 grand to the track, and if I won some, let's say I won 15 grand or 30 grand, that wasn't gonna change my life. It wasn't. I was making whatever playing basketball. But if I do that long enough, it will change my life for the worse, because 'cause I'm gonna lose, you lose more days than you win. And once you start chasing the money, it's a wrap, and that's what I would do. You get down, you play all these games in your head with the math, and you start chasing money, and you leave the track, and you're cussing at yourself, and you're throwing things and all that, and guess what? Got more races the next day. Let's go back and get them. That's that's the mind of an addict, a gambling addict, I think.
Yeah, it's just I just can't. What you say about gambling and friction. My roommate, my junior year in college at UCLA, was a gambling addict, and this really shady guy would show up once a week and take like $100 from him, and I'm like, and I was clear, oh, that's the bookie. It was so shady, it was so weird that I was never tempted to gamble. But I've got Kevin Hart and Charles Barkley endorsing something, and then it's on my phone, and for whatever reason, I think I have insight into Arsenal playing Bayern Munich because I understand football better than most people, and why not make the game a little bit more fun? get that dope a hit. And if it was on, I agree with you so much. And I think you'd be such a wonderful spokesperson here. I think online gaming is a fucking train wreck for young men.
Yeah, and imagine, Scott, we went to college and you're going. I didn't drink in college, but all my friends did, who I grew up with. They drank, they partied, they did all that stuff. Imagine going to college now. And, I remember fraternity brothers, playing cards and gambling with cards. I can't imagine the young people out there right now. You're with your boys and you're drinking and you're smoking and you're having fun. You're a young college kid. Let's bet on the game. Yeah, let's bet on the game. It wasn't an option, when we were growing up, not legally anyway. And now it's legal. You talked about Charles. Well, all of the, and I go way back with Charles. We were longtime golf buddies.
Seems like a good guy. I want to be clear.
Great
Strikes me as a good guy.
The leagues, and the players, we used to be warned at the beginning of the year. You'd have the same group go around to 30 NBA teams and tell them they put up on the wall behind you pictures. This guy's in Miami, this guy's in New York, this guy's in Chicago. Do not associate with these people. These are known gamblers, they're known bookies. Don't associate with them. And so it was a no-no. Everybody knew gambling, sports betting, hell, they would, what are you guys doing knowing the line? Why would you know the line? Like, it was a no-no. And now, because the gambling money is figured into the collective bargaining agreement, and the owners get a cut, and the players get a cut, and the salaries have exploded, it kind of goes hand in hand. We've already seen a couple of instances. Shohei Ohtani and his translator in baseball, who gambled away. Not Shohei didn't, apparently, but his translator stole and gambled away millions of dollars and bet with them. We just saw a guy named Jonte Porter in the NBA, a marginal NBA player who was betting on himself, betting on his team to lose, and now has been banned for life from the NBA for gambling. And this is an NBA player. Imagine, Scott, imagine small college players who can gamble on their own games under the radar, or think that they can gamble on their own games under the radar, that aren't making any money. It's a time bomb, in my opinion.
We'll be right back. I thought of you when I was thinking about college athletes and pay. I'm curious to get your view on whether or not college athletes should be compensated.
Yes, they should. No, I'm not saying it's easy, but yeah, I mentioned in my book that, I was paid under the table, like so many top players in college. Bought me a car, and all of this stuff was illegal way back when. They've established the NIL now, which is name, image, and likeness, where you can go and make money off of your name, image, and likeness. When I went to the University of Kentucky in 1986, I signed away my name, image, and likeness to the university, and they've had that until just recently.
Ed O'Bannon. I went to school with the O'Bannon brothers, and he changed that, right? Or
he
the focus
changed
of
everything for us. They did. So yes, but it's not an easy answer. These are young people. Now they're going to have to pay taxes, but that's a good thing. Teaching these kids. I got into the NBA and got my first check, gross 50,000, net 33. I turned to my teammates. I was 19, 20 years old, and said, "I've heard about tax returns. When do we get this back?" And they said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, when do we get this money back?" I said, "You can't be this dumb. We don't get that money back." I didn't know, but now, if kids are making money and you have to pay taxes on it in college, you better be taking a finance class, or the school better be teaching you a little bit of financial literacy. I didn't have any. Most players come from nothing. Most pro players come from nothing and have no fiscal responsibility at all. And hopefully now with the NIL coming along, some adults will make sure that these players just don't go willy-nilly through life knowing nothing about the money they're making.
Say in the eighth grade, you didn't hit a growth spurt and you ended up being 4 or 5 inches shorter. And just you could be on the JV team in high school, maybe varsity for a couple of years, but absolutely no college prospects. And you knew early that sports weren't going to be an option for you. Do you think your struggles with addiction would have been the same, better, or worse?
I think probably worse. I, yeah. Yeah, Scott, I didn't have any ambition other than that. I didn't have any ambition other than playing sports. You know, if you'd asked me, what do you think you'd be doing? You know, it would be something like coaching basketball. You know, be something in, where I grew up in Owensboro, Kentucky. You played sports and you went to school, and when school, for most of my buddies, they played just as much and worked just as hard as I did growing up. When our high school season ended, their basketball careers ended for the most of them, and those guys struggled. They went to college, and now they're not. They've been playing basketball with me every day. What do I do now? And if I would have been in that same position with them, oh my God, I can only imagine I would have run off the rails because I would have been, I'm sure, at 18 years old, not knowing how to spend my time. I've been doing this forever. I'm sure I would have, I'm not sure, but I can definitely see myself partying and being the guy that can't stop partying. So I think that always was kind of in the back of my mind that, look, man, you need to stay away from this or you'll be a big train wreck. And it happened anyway, but at least I was able to get my career in there before that took over.
And you have kids. What advice would you give to parents around kids and sports and competitive sports?
That's another really good question. My dad left me alone, and maybe to the point of too much. I never was. My dad coached, and I would watch his practices all the time. And if I wanted to know something, he would tell me, but he didn't push me, and I liked that because I saw so many other parents just involved in their kids' stuff to the point, and I could tell that I was better, maybe considerably better, and I see these kids working and going, their parents are getting pissed off at them because they don't wanna go to the gym or they're not doing this well enough or that well enough, and I saw so many kids flame out by the time they were in ninth grade, 10th grade because it was no fun anymore because their parents made it no fun, and I think the one thing that I've been able to see is that kids are gonna come across this at their own pace. If you push a kid into something, or if you tell a kid they can't do something, well, they're gonna wanna do that. And, you know, you just can't live your life, through your kids and their sports and what they do. You can be there for them, root them on, but, being obsessed with them becoming a Division I athlete or a pro athlete, it's really hard to do. And the odds are that somehow, some way, they're not going to make it there. So, I think you just have to be really, really careful pushing your kids into sports.
I got to ask you, or I got to imagine that everyone from the Phoenix Suns to the league itself, when they think, who do we want to come speak to the rookie class? I got to think you're on everyone's short list. So I'm going to assume that's the case. But they don't give you much time. They say, Rex, we got to get back to practice. You got 10, what are the cliff notes on what you tell? I mean, I feel like the thing that was struck me about these athletes, I always felt like they're children. I was a child when I was that age. I was a child. I couldn't have handled the media, the pressure, the money, the temptations, the maturity when you don't get started. I mean, I just wasn't enough of a man to deal with what these boys have to deal with. What, if any, or what are the key points of advice you give to these young men as they're trying to, start a career in professional sports?
Yeah, Scott, you have these meetings, drug meetings, gambling meetings. with the league. They'll come in, they'll talk to every team throughout the year, and I was the guy that was sitting in those meetings, and those meetings are mandatory. Like, you have to be there, but they only get like 45 minutes or an hour, and I was the one sitting over in the corner, looking at my watch, pointing to our GM or whoever it is, going, "They got 5 more minutes, and I'm out of here," and, like, gonna walk out. Goes, "I gotta go play golf. Y'all don't, you've taken up enough of my time." Sat there and didn't listen to much of anything that was said. Don't be that guy is what I tell them, is, you know, every player, every athlete is one step away, one wrong step away from never playing again, ever. And if you haven't prepared your life or prepared enough for what life's gonna be like once you finish playing, you're gonna struggle because you're gonna fill that void with something that's probably not constructive. And you also have to think about this, Scott, and I know you talked about dopamine and endorphins earlier. I grew up playing basketball from age 5, and so by age 15, I've made enough game winners to last a lifetime for most people. And when you do that in practice, in games, and you start doing it in front of fans, um, you don't realize it, but that's a rush. There's a real rush that goes along with it, and it kinda becomes old hat after a while, but then you do it in high school and college and in the NBA, and it becomes kinda something you do, and you do it every single day. Well, when that's over, it's really over. You're never gonna That's a rush you're never getting back. How you gonna fill it? For me, I filled it with painkillers, and I filled it with going to the track and getting a horse to get up in the final jumps to get that rush, you know? It's, unless you're prepared for the end of your career, and my good buddy John Lucas always says, who struggled with addiction, forever and was the number 1 pick in the draft in, like, 1972. He said, "Every athlete dies twice, at the end of their careers and at the end of life, and you have to be prepared for that," and I certainly was not prepared for that.
And advice not to NBA players, but advice to other dads that have struggled with their own stuff.
Man, your kids are always watching. They're always watching, and, I'll tell this one little story that's in the book, but my son was about 10 years old, and he was in the car with me, and, I would go to the track every day, and so I had bad tickets, losing tickets that I would have everywhere, in the car, in the cubby hole, and whatever, and I had walked into the store. I said, "All right, I gotta go pay for gas, Zeke. I'll be right back." Left my son in the car. He's sitting right outside, and I went inside, paid for gas, came back out, put the gas in the car, and right at that time, he was really getting into, math, 2nd, 3rd grade and whatnot, and I came back out in the car, and he was so proud of himself. He had gone through my bad gambling tickets and realized that the number, that I had lost was around $30,000 for that day or whatever it was. And I just remember getting in the car. He was so proud that he added all this up. He didn't even know what he was doing. Didn't know those were gambling losses. And I just remember feeling like the worst father in the world for doing that to my kids, um, exposing them to that. And then the worst part of it was I couldn't stop. I just couldn't stop. And so, I think I went deeper into a hole. So the kids are always watching. Just know it, even if they're little. And at some point, fast forward 8 or 9 years, and there's my daughter telling me, "Dad, what about the gambling? You got a gambling problem." They're always watching. So be mindful.
So, as someone who is entirely doesn't lacks the credentials nor the domain expertise or even the relationship with you to say this, I'm going to say it anyways. I wish you'd forgive yourself. I just feel so much pain and guilt. And I just got to imagine you're this larger than life character with great skills. You make other people feel good. I got to think your kids and everyone around you just want you to forgive yourself and be happy.
Thanks, buddy. I do struggle with it, but, and there are times that I go through there are times that I'll feel good about, kind of where I am and what I've done, but then that doubt creeps back in. I think for me, Scott, it's just, once you've run your life off the rails, or once I did anyway, I just go, "Man, I didn't even know I had that capability." And now that I know I can do that, it scares the shit out of me. It just does. And so I'm cautious. I continue to try to stay, with on my therapy. And, I have friends that have keys to my place in case I want to spend the day sleeping. They can come get me and, go do things. So I've got safeguards in place. But life's hard. It is. Life's just hard. It's hard for everyone. And, I'm doing the best I can with it, and I can't tell you, Scott, how much those words mean to me. They really do. Don't think I'm just saying that. I know that there are people out there pulling for me. I hope that, I do get to a point where, you know, I I've accepted, kind of where I am and what I've done and all that, but it's still a process at this point.
Rex Chapman is considered by many the greatest basketball player ever produced by the state of Kentucky. In 2 years at the University of Kentucky, he scored over 1,000 points, led the Wildcats to a Sweet 16 appearance, and was nicknamed King Rex. He then spent 12 seasons in the NBA. He currently hosts the Smartless podcast, Owned, and his memoir, co-authored with Seth Davis, It's Hard for Me to Live with Me, is out now. He joins us from his home in Phoenix. Rex, there are two different stories. There's an athlete who's incredible, who inspires people, goes on to live a good, productive life. And then there's an athlete who's incredible, inspires people, struggles, has a fall, and then comes back and helps other people going through the same thing. One of those lives is meaningful. The other is profound. You, my brother, are leading a profound life. You're helping people. I mean this sincerely. I wish you the best, and I hope that you register that you're helping other people.
Thanks, Scott. I really can't thank you enough.